faces. Worst generation, cooking up a feast while he's turning through the pages. Theories that he's making, from showing it as sane, blocked in, analyzing, using observation. Yeah, observation. Rambling addiction.
Hello, StrawHatLucas here, and welcome back to another episode of Rambling Addiction, the show where I talk and you listen. Now, if you're here because of the saucy thumbnail, I meant what I said. Hiss your homies goodnight. It's free. But no, yes, if you could not tell, I am talking today about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
But it was I, Dio!
Specifically, part 1 and 2 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Because you see, I have never read JoJo's before.
What did he say?
Well, I mean, I have now. I've read part 1 and 2, but I've not read any further past that. My experience with JoJo's came from, I think, in 2016, they started playing part 3 or 4 on Adult Swim. I caught a couple episodes of it and was like, this isn't for me. And I think the reason I reacted that way is just because of the style of the animation and everything. Was very intense for no reason in some spots, at least from what I had seen. It's hard to recall. I just remember not being that into it. Fast forward to 2023. I posted a video on my TikTok asking people for manga recommendations, and one of the most recommended mangas to me was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But for some reason, everyone kept telling me to skip part 1 and 2, and like they didn't really pertain to the story, and I could start at part 3 or 4 and just go from there. But that's not the kind of man I am. So Q 2023, I sit down, I open part 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I read the entire thing before I went to bed that night. With part 1, Phantom Blood, I just could not stop reading, guys. And it really makes me wonder why so many people told me to skip it. Because Araki, as a mangaka, is one of the best artists when it comes to the human form. This man can draw body movement in ways that allow you to picture exactly what's happening in real life, which a lot of good mangaka can do, but this man's body poses are just on a whole different level.
To a whole novel level, man.
Now, getting into part 1, I think YouTuber Totally Not Mark said it best in his review of it. The manga is distinctly split up into the story of Dio and how it intermingles and becomes the story of Jonathan Joestar. Let's start off talking about Dio Brando. One of the best antagonists I've ever read in a manga. And while I wouldn't necessarily put him at the top of my list, the writing for Dio is just so good. You see at the beginning of the story, there's a carriage crash that involved Jonathan's father. Dio's father comes to rob this man, and JoJo's dad thinks he's saving his life, so he's like, yeah, I'm saving your life. Just remember this. You gave me some money, and remember this. So when Dio's dad is on death's door, he sends him off to live with Jonathan's family. Dio immediately shows off that he is perfect.
You bitch.
He is a god among men, and because of that, he is willing to take Jonathan's whole life. And I quite literally mean his whole life. Dio tries to steal his friends, steal his girlfriend, he burns his dog. Yeah, I didn't stutter there. Dio sets his dog on fire. And it unalives. I hate that YouTube makes me say that, but that's what happens. And of course, Dio learns of the stone mask. The stone mask is an ancient artifact that was found by Jonathan's father, and it is mysterious and has all these like weird properties to it. Anyway, Dio puts on that mask and becomes a vampire. But before we get there, let's talk about Jonathan, the protagonist of the story. In the first bits of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Jonathan is presented as this very goody two-shoes, always does the right thing. He steals a pipe from his father, which I know doesn't sound very goody two-shoes, but the other kids wouldn't smoke it with him because they were like, he's gonna tattle on us if we do that. Which kind of shows that he has a reputation for doing that sort of thing. Then he meets Dio, this person that's supposed to be a brother to him, and just does not like him at all. Not that Jonathan doesn't like Dio, Dio just doesn't like Jonathan at all, which in turn makes Jonathan not like him. So Dio becomes a vampire shortly after Jonathan's father dies, and at some point Speedwagon is introduced. I won't lie, guys, it's been over a year since I first read JoJo's, so I had to get a little bit of a refresher, and if I missed some like plot points and stuff, don't be afraid to yell at me in the comments below. But yes, so Dio becomes vampire. Jonathan starts to train with my favorite side character from this story. I'm lying, it's Speedwagon, but Zeppeli. Zeppeli is an interesting master to Jonathan's pupil, and I really like the Hammond power system when I first got familiar with it. There's just something about it that makes sense. It's because it's breathing, it's controlling the oxygen in your blood molecules and things like that. Like the extending, like when he showed Jonathan like the mechanics of how he extends his hand when he hits. I don't know why I did that. When he hits and it like extends the sinew or whatever, like that is brilliant. Yes, Araki, please give me more details like that. But don't overdo it. Don't pull a gay. But yes, I love the relationship between Jonathan and Zeppeli. And of course, later in this part, Zeppeli dies in a fight against Dio. Or Dio's minions. I can't really remember. I won't lie, guys. Oh, you should read it again before reviewing it. Shh. But yeah, so Zeppeli dies, and this comes into my biggest problem with Araki's writing in part 1. It feels that Araki had gotten how he wanted to draw the series down for the most part. Obviously, it does improve in part 2 and from what I've seen so far, part 3. But it feels like he knew the style he was going in. When it comes to writing, it feels like he didn't really know what to do with the side characters in the story. I felt weight from it when Zeppeli died, but I didn't feel emotionally distraught or like upset. You guys know what I'm talking about. Sometimes when a fictional character does pass away, it'll break you. And then other times it's like, oh man, that sucks. Like, and that's the whole reaction. And that's how I felt with Zeppeli. And I feel like it's because of the way that Araki wrote this character. Not that we didn't spend enough time with him or anything like that. It felt like the death should have held more weight. But just because it didn't hold that weight for me, the reader, doesn't mean it didn't hold that weight for Jonathan Joestar. And that is where Araki made up for that one weakness here in part 1, with giving us such a solid protagonist in the first JoJo. Jonathan, in the way he deals with not only his father's death and Zeppeli's death, is a masterclass of how a protagonist should deal with death. While yes, they are sad and heartbroken about it, they grow from it, they learn from it, and they make themselves better instead of getting hung up on their grief. And that's a trope that carries over into part 2, but we will get there. So, giant fight between Dio and Jojo. And I love this fight. I actually did go back and reread the final fight between Dio and Jojo. That double page spread of Dio, guys. I'm gonna throw it up on screen. Look at it. Look at it. God, it looks so good. But yes, this final fight between Dio and Jojo is perfect and an amazing climax to the story. And seeing Jojo defeat Dio just felt gratifying. It felt so satisfying to see it finally come to fruition. Until we're on the boat and Jojo is married to Irina, who is newly pregnant, and Dio shows up with a minion. They murk a lady. So yes, Dio is not defeated just yet, and in the last strength he has, Jojo not only saves his wife and unborn child, a baby from the ship who will be important later, and then he sacrifices himself to make sure that Dio goes into a watery grave. And anything I said just before about the lack of oomph, and to go against what I just said earlier about Araki and writing the death of Zeppeli, Jonathan's death holds so much weight to the reader. I can remember vividly before I started part 2 not understanding how Araki could carry on the story, especially knowing that at the time when I started reading it, there was 9 parts already to it? So I was very confused about that. Until I started reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, Battle Tendency. Guys, when it comes to Part 2 Battle Tendency, like, here's JoJo's 1 for me, like, it's up there, right? Here's JoJo's 2. Like, you guys can't even see it on screen because, like, it's up there, guys. It's so good.
Nice!
Let's first talk about Joseph Joestar, the rambunctious teenage grandson of Jonathan Joestar. He is the child of the child that Irina had. When we first meet Jojo, he's beating up some gangsters who are picking on his buddy Smokey, which, hey, I have a buddy Smokey as well. Go subscribe to Grand Line Bound. But yes, he's beating up some bullies who are picking on his buddy Smokey. He's very rude and kind of rough around the edges. Seems to be somewhat of a ladies' man. I really dug this JoJo. I won't lie, guys. Like, it's gonna be tough for Jotaro to take his place, like, in my heart at least. I'm getting ahead of myself. But But yeah, so we meet Jojo. He goes down to Mexico because Speedwagon tells him to. I'm paraphrasing, of course, for brevity, but nonetheless, Jojo goes to Mexico, meets some SS members.
私はテキーラ酒を持ってまいりましたの。とってもよろしいかしら?
And we are introduced to one of my favorite side characters who is also an SS member. I can't believe I just said that sentence, but StrawHatLucas. So Jojo is there to defeat this Pillar Man that the Nazi regime has found. So he gets into the base and he meets StrawHatLucas, who is trying to awaken the Pillar Man. Well, he does, and the Pillar Man wakes up. His name is Santana, and he just goes around just wrecking everything. He is murking people from left and right. And so Jojo and StrawHatLucas work together, and StrawHatLucas sadly gets defeated in this battle, torn to pieces, one might say. He's gonna come back, don't worry. But anyway, this leads Jojo to find out about the existence of 3 other Pillar Men. And him and Speedwagon journey to, I believe it's Italy, and they meet my favorite character in the entire JoJo series from what I've read so far, Caesar Zeppeli. Caesar is definitely a ladies' man, and the only thing that he finds more important than wooing a woman is fighting Joseph Joestar. Like, seriously, that first meeting of theirs around the fountain and stuff, like, oh god, dude, what a time. And Caesar is proficient, just like his grandfather, in the usage of Hammond. So Caesar and Jojo confront the Pillar Man and end up losing the fight, prompting Caesar to take Jojo to meet Lisa.
She goes by the name of Lisa. Nobody knows her true name, her place of origin, where she studied, or how she mastered the art of Hamon. She will be Jojo's coach for as long as it takes.
Oh, also during this time, Jojo got these little rings like put around parts of his body. I think one's in his esophagus, one's around his heart, and another one, I can't remember where it's at. Or maybe it's just 2 of them. Either way, the only way he can get these rings full of poison off him is to train for, I think it's 30 days, and then go defeat the Pillar Men. So that is exactly what Jojo and Caesar do. When they first meet Lisa, she has them do this immensely challenging task of climbing a giant pillar in the middle of this like spike field covered in oil. And if I'm not painting the picture well enough, here's a clip from the anime. Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. Nonetheless, the boys do succeed. I think it takes them both about 3 days to do it, which is impressive, because if I was down there, I'd just be dead. They finish this task, and then they start training with 2 masters. They get very proficient in Hammond. We get a bit of a time jump. Then AC/DC, the Pillar Man, shows up to fight Jojo and Caesar. He sadly kills the masters and begins his battle with Jojo, who promptly wrecks his shit. And I love this fight. I'm not even gonna lie, guys. The fight between AC/DC and Joseph was just insane. So Jojo gets one of the rings off by defeating AC/DC in an elaborate way involving strings and spikes. During this time, oh my god, I forgot to mention the amulet. So yes, there's this MacGuffin in part 2, this amulet that amplifies the Pillarman's power, and Lisa is in possession of it. During the fight with AC/DC, it is found out that it has been shipped out to somewhere, and they cannot figure out where. This is when AC/DC, who is presumably dead at this point, possesses Lisa's handmaiden, Susie Q. It is because of this possession that they find out where the gem is headed, and they go there after saving Susie Q, of course, to stop the remaining 2 Pillarmen, Wamu and Cars. Also, I know there's some debate in the fan base if it's Wamu or Wham. I know the dub says Wham, the manga says Wamu. Take it as it is, do whatever you want with that. So yes, they go to fight Wamu and Cars, and they come up on this castle. Caesar wants to rush in, Jojo wants to take his time and wait, and sadly, Caesar does not listen to this. He explains to Jojo that his father struggled his whole life to defeat these Pillarmen and try to find out anything of them, and sadly, his father, who he had thought abandoned him in his youth, ended up sacrificing his life to save his son, who at the time he thought was a stranger. It's actually a very touching moment, and this is where Araki approved in between part 1 and part 2 for me. He knew how to write the side characters perfectly in Battle Tendency, and I'm very excited to see how he writes the characters in part 3 compared to part 2. But yes, so Caesar goes in and tragically loses his life to Wamu. This was one of the best written deaths in any manga I have ever read. if I'm being honest. There was just so much weight to it. And seeing Jojo, he finds the bubble that Caesar had left for him with the antidote. And he says, you know, I'm not going to take it until I defeat Wamu myself. I'm not going to take it until I defeat Wamu myself. And it's just such a powerful moment. And then he wraps Caesar's headband around his head.
I have to try and hold my feelings back.
To go on and face the last two of the Pillarmen. He defeats Wamu in a chariot race, and then him and Kars have an all-out battle after Kars absorbs the power of the amulet. He ends up defeating Kars with the help of our formerly dead Nazi friend Stroheim, and flies the ancient evil on a plane with himself in it as well into an active volcano. But unlike Part 1, Joseph survives this incident, and instead of going straight back to his family, he allows them to think that he is deceased so he can get some peace and quiet while he's on his honeymoon with his new girl, his main squeeze, Susie Q.
Are you telling me you don't know that we got married? You got married?
I really enjoyed Part 2. Especially compared to Part 1, but that said, I still do not understand why anyone would tell me to skip these two parts of the story. This whole setup between Jonathan and Joseph, and like seeing the grandfather and then the grandson, is really intriguing to me as a reader. I love when the passage of time is easily noticeable in a story, or that the author takes more steps into showing the audience that the passage of time is happening. And I think Araki has really nailed it with the formula he's got for JoJo's. And I think the fact that he's done 9 parts to this story is a testament to that. In closing, I'm very excited to see where my journey with JoJo's takes me. I will be releasing a Rambling Addiction episode every single time I finish the next part. So check out for Part 3. It probably won't be for another month or so. I won't even lie to you guys. I'm reading way too many manga as it is, and I've only just started Part 3. When it comes down to it, I think Araki deserves every single one of the accolades that the manga community bestows upon him. My man has put in the work since the 80s and has never stopped producing quality content from what I can tell so far. I'm very excited to continue with Jotaro in Part 3. It was cool seeing Old Man Joseph there. I'm only like 4 or 5 chapters in, so please no spoilers for Part 3 below, and if you do spoil me, I'll probably forget by the time I get there. But yes, I've been StrawHatLucas, Captain of the Last Arc. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, but more importantly than that, I hope that you have a wonderful night.